let's do our best today to not go over 1 hour. Okay, that's our goal for today. Okay, so welcome to another Mushin mobility chat with me and ZhiQian. So like I said, our goal is we want to keep it to an hour. So what's gonna happen today? We're gonna start today's session with hot seat. So what is a hot seat? It's just a short part where you get to just ask us questions and we get to get a sort of a healthy dialogue going on, like brainstorm and discuss your questions and ideas. So after hot seat, ZhiQian will share with you his 5 steps to awesome mobility training. Okay. All right, and then we end the session with another a rapid fire Q&A. So along today's session, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. You can send them to ZhiQian or you can send them to me. We'll compile them, and we have time at the end of it, we'll answer as many as we can. If we can't, we'll try our best to answer you outside the session, or we might save it for the next one. All cool? All good? All right, so yeah, I think let's film. Yeah, if you want to keep your video off, that's fine. If you want to show us your lovely comb in your face, that's awesome as well. We don't mind. All right, so let's kick off today with our first hot seat. Tonio, are you here, man?
I am here.
Tonio? All right.
Yep.
Good
Can you hear
morning,
me?
sir. Yep, I can hear you.
Good morning. Wonderful.
Yeah. So
okay.
Yep. Let's do it, man.
Sure. So 2 questions. One is related to hip and shoulder mobility. It's clear after taking 2 months of online courses that we can begin stitching together a private practice to keep the hip and shoulder mobility in an elevated state, so we can do our movement, our handstands, our dance, our solo practices. What would you consider to be a minimum regimen, a minimum diet of hip and shoulder mobility to keep up with these practices, specifically handstand, and then you can imagine some type of floor dance or capoeira style movement as well on the side?
I would say the dosage depends on you. Dosage depends on how much time you can spare, how much you can physically handle in terms of training, and in relation to that, how much other things you are doing, because you only have so much capacity, resources for training, you see. So you don't want to be dumping 1 full hour of time onto shoulder mobility stuff, then your shoulders are already dead and tired and you want to do handstands after that, it's definitely going to be affected. Yeah, so you have to consider these few things: time, and your other training as well. Yeah, so manage that accordingly. There is no ideal answer, unfortunately. It goes down to how you can effectively plan your program and what you would prioritize more. Because if, let's say, it is a fact that your shoulder strength or endurance is limited, you might probably want to have a lighter mobility session, just enough that you can open up the shoulder, just so that you can dedicate more time onto practicing handstands. Or as compared to if that day is just tiring for handstands, you want to spend more time on shoulder mobility, you can commit more time into a more intense shoulder mobility session, for example. Yeah, does that make sense? Mm-hmm.
Yep, that makes sense. So essentially, ratchet up and ratchet down as necessary.
Yep. You have a second question?
Sure. It's mostly the mentality of toughness. I mean, many of us are coming from some type of work or maybe, heaven forbid, CrossFit, where there's this, gladiator warrior mentality of keep push, 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 go, go, go. And one of the messages that you and Alvin are propagating in Mushin, which I think makes a lot of sense, is train smartly, train efficiently. It does you no good if you're broken. And so I'm trying to figure out how you throttle Like, how do you personally push yourself? And when do you back off? Is it really pain the only indicator, or that 30% pain indicator, or is there a constellation of other things that involve like knowing when to begin backing off that gladiator mentality of just push, 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 go, go, go?
Start at a reasonably light pace. I guess that will be my answer to you. Like that's one of the reasons why you would warm up, right? The idea of warming up, like I'm just running through from the start of the session first, then leading towards the later bit of the session. One of the reasons for warming up is just so that you can prime your body for the later movements, the later demands of your training. So you don't just jump right straight into like a very deep back bend position or like one arm handstand unless you're like at that level of practice. Otherwise, for the most part, most if not all would have started with something that primes their body up for a more challenging or difficult movement. That's in general, and that's subjective. What is my warm-up may seem like your training. What is my training may seem like someone else's warm-up, you see. So don't copy someone else. I guess that will be what I would say. Gauge it according to where you're at. So yeah, and from there, I think there is a certain degree of like having to, grit yourself through, right? Like it depends on how you feel for that day as well. If that day is just a terrible day, you will just keep it at mid intensity because you just don't have the mental capacity to push, and that's reasonable. If there are days that are better, then you could afford to do more challenging stuff. Or if you're just used to that pace, you could definitely always be pushing at a higher intensity and your body can deal with it. Again, all this is subjective, but a sound answer would just be to slowly ramp up and feel through it from there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to chime in quickly. Oh, shit, that was our timer. But I was chiming very quickly on that second question. I think another indicator of what you can use besides pain is actually improvement in whatever you're training. So if let's say, example, if you were training your splits and you're doing all this splits work and you're not improving, like you're going hard, you're not improving, then something has to change because obviously what you're doing is not giving you the desired result. So it's like sometimes, like you mentioned, we always advocate working smarter, and it's important to understand that working smarter doesn't always mean working lesser or working harder. It could be a mix of both, depending on how your body is reacting and what improvement and changes are occurring. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yep, thank you.
All right, cool. Okay, so that timer that you heard, that beeping you heard was actually our 5-minute timer. We are trying our best to keep to 5 minutes for each hot seat so that this doesn't become like a 2-hour chit-chat session. Okay, so now aiming for 1 hour. Okay, it's 1 hour. Now let's invite our second hot seat, Annette. Hey, welcome. Yeah, you may unmute yourself so I can hear you talk.
Oh, okay. Hello.
Hello. Welcome. Yes.
Okay, I just have one question. So for example, there's different kinds of stretching, different kinds of mobility work. How do you know what to do at when to do what? For example, I feel that after you go for a run or after you do a HIIT class, the kind of mobility or stretching is different from if you were doing from a whole body and you're just really working on flexibility. So, I mean, I understand that there's different purpose for different mobility work, but when to do what and what is effective for what? You know what I mean? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm just going to paraphrase your question to make sure that I've gotten it right. So you're basically asking, when should you do what type of stretch?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think there's one more portion, the most important portion that we have to add before that, which is, what are you trying to achieve? Because
I
like,
think,
because like you
I think
mentioned, right? Like
yeah.
all stretches, we understand that each stretch type is different.
Yes.
So before we decide like what do, we need to first understand like, okay, what is the goal we're trying to achieve with the stretch?
I think maybe not so much for myself, but like generically, I'm maybe for days where you do like intense exercise and you want to stretch it out, it's just to maintain that your body doesn't become too tight after the strenuous activity. But when you're working on, let's say, like stretching alone or mobility alone, it's really just to improve flexibility. So maybe one is more for maintaining to make sure that you don't become too tight. And then the other one is to work on becoming even more flexible or mobile and to prevent injuries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm just going to add in one level beyond that, which is, I think this there might be a misconception that exercising makes your muscles tight. You know, like our muscle length doesn't shorten or lengthen magically in the short period of time. So doing that 1 hour, 2 hour, whatever intense workout doesn't cause your muscles to just shrink up and shorten permanently. That tightness is just a reaction to you working out. It's just a sensation. It's just a message. So, like you said, so if let's say the goal is right now you worked out, hit workout, you feel really tight. There's a lot of tension in your body, right? And you would like to do something to help you ease up the tension. Yeah. In that case, maybe doing a gentle stretch or passive stretch for a longer period of time may help you ease the tension off so that you feel better after. But let's say if your goal was to like you want to work on increasing your range, getting stronger, and all kind of stuff. I see stretches as two ways. Stretches differ based on the amount of load it places in your body. So that's the first factor. And I'm assuming you're asking me from a coaching perspective, so I'll talk a bit about that. The second is on the person's ability to handle that load. So you have like your world-class athletes or your experienced practitioners who have built up a capacity to handle more demand and load on the body. So you have people like doing 5 sessions a day, like a strength training session, followed by a skill training session, followed by a mobility session in the same day. And these are professional athletes who have spent years building up the kind of capacity. So it works for them because despite working out that much, they actually do improve. But now if you take like, let's just call it a casual exerciser, or even somebody who's new to this kind of stuff. And if you add in, like after a run, right? After a run, it takes out a certain amount of energy from us, right? We get tired, muscles have tension. If that run has taken up all your energy, and now we try to do like mobility style exercise after, my guess is that it just will not be as effective because you don't have the energy or the capacity to handle that load, to make it meaningful. So like what we're talking about here is not so much of a step-by-step basis, but more of a concept and a way that we can apply it to your own training. So if that's the goal for today, right? We want to stretch, not because stretching is good for us and should do every day, but why? To relax, sure, that's a stretch. If you want to do a bit more, try to build strength, try to get better in the position, maybe do a bit more active, depending on if you have the energy for it. Does it kind of make sense to you?
Okay, then as you ask a question, I was thinking about another question. So for example, when you stretch too much without building the strength, you get injured. Oh, is that my timer?
Yeah, but okay, I'll give it to you. Let's ask the question. We do a short answer to this one.
Yeah. As in, so if you just keep working on stretching and you don't build the muscles, you get injured. So why does building the muscle help to prevent? I mean, yeah, you know why it helps to prevent injury, but how does it prevent injury with as you build the mobility, building the muscles?
So like you think of injury, when you think of injury, let's think of like your joint capacity or your body's ability to handle load and that load, right? So when this load exceeds whatever your body can handle, injury happens. And that load can come from many different things. It can come from a repetitive motion. It can come from an external impact like falling down, or it could come from like Okay, sorry, let's talk about these two examples. So in the case of stretching every day, stretching too much, even normal passive stretching, there is a load. So if you're always stretching and you're always forcing and you're always pushing to a certain range that maybe you don't have it yet, such that maybe your body compensates a certain way, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it only makes sense that over time, you actually just, the joint just gets injured. And all it takes is that one time where you over push and it goes beyond the capacity, and then stuff happens. So we're not looking so much of muscle size or flexibility. We're looking at more at your body's ability to handle load at certain ranges. The better your joint or that can handle load, the less chance you have of getting injured. Yeah. In a nutshell, I could talk about this for an hour. So is that a question?
Yes.
All
Yes.
right.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. Awesome. So we have, I think we have two more questions. We're gonna talk about the first question, which is thoughts on active versus passive stretching. Which one should we do, or should we balance both out? Okay, ZhiQian, you wanna chime in on this one?
When I see passive and active, I will use forward folding, hip flexion, as like the main example for now and through the rest of the call. So to me, passive would just simply be like sitting down on the floor and just trying to stretch forward, trying to reach for your toes and beyond. A more active mobility, which requires more strength input by general understanding, would be like you are in a standing forward fold holding a dumbbell or like some heavy load and you're just letting the load bring you down, and you might probably just be holding it there isometrically, static hold, or you are going in and out of the position. Okay, so I would simply put it that passive is a lower intensity type of modality, and active is a higher intensity sort of modality. So I'm not sure if this is the best comparison, but it's like you are comparing like sprinting versus slow jog or brisk walking. Like different intensities would tax your body differently. That's the first thing you'll consider. So if it taxes you more, you probably need more recovery time. Different intensity would also mean that there is also a certain limit to like how much you can do, and in turn that affects how much you would do. Yeah, so overall it comes back down to the same answer of it depends. Depends on how your body receives the sensation, the input, and depends on how you recover, depends on how much time you have. Yeah, so I can't say there is one better one, but I personally would prefer more on the active end of stuff, just because I buy into the idea that building more strength gives you better control. Better control just allows you for more range of motion, a healthier access of range of motion. So to me, I would personally lean more to active, but for the 3 points that I've stated, you would be the judge on how you would, decide on what you would prefer more, because some people cannot tolerate more than once a week of active stretching, of like that loaded stretching. Some people just don't see progress from like long light passive holds. So different people respond differently. Yeah, so consider on those. It can be a trial and error for some part, and you just have to find what works for you. Yes, Alvin.
Oh yeah, just want to add one. Well, just one, right? One thing to that question is that I don't like the word balance when we talk about different kind of stretches, because balance sort of implies that it should be equal, that you need an equal amount of both. But in reality is you need what you need. It's not dictated that all humans need to do 50% passive, 50% active. It just doesn't make sense. we are all different. We all have different levels of mobility / flexibility. You gotta do what you need to achieve what you want to do, and yeah, that's the rule that I go by for myself and all my clients. Okay, so we will move on. We have one more hot seat, one more, right? Before you all go on to the weighted part of ZhiQian's top 5 secrets to better mobility training. Yeah, so Jessica, are you around? Can you just unmute yourself?
Yep. Sorry to keep
Hey,
you guys from the interesting bit. one more question, and also thanks for doing this, by the way, guys.
No, it's our pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
And the answer might be depends. I'm thinking, but let's see. It was more, I guess, for normal people in inverted commas, i.e., like general mass population, not specific to a type of training. Is there like one mobility thing we should be doing, say, every day? One thing we should do every day, or like 3 fundamental things that everyone in the world, in an ideal world, should do like every week?
Okay, so ZhiQian, I'll take this one first, okay? Then you can add in if you want to. So I think you got the gist of our message when you said, yeah, it kind of, long answer is, it depends. Yep. But short answer, if we're in terms of talking about people who are new to mobility training or have not experienced such sort of training, my personal opinion is that the most important thing is consistency.
Okay.
So before we even talk about what type of stretches should we do, what's the best stretch, blah, 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 the first thing I tell everyone who's new is to be consistent. Build the habit. And from that habit, stuff will change. Because if you're new, let's say you're new, and by the way, all the stuff you're saying doesn't just apply to people with amazing mobility. Oh, whoops. That was the last question. It doesn't apply to people with amazing mobility. It applies to everyone. The same set of rules apply whether you are starting out or whether you are super experienced. Your body capacity is your body capacity. It's just how much capacity we have and how experienced we are in doing the stretches back. So back to your question, like I would say, don't fall into the trap of finding like the top 3 or the best thing to do. I would just pick your favorite stretch, like pick a body part that you want to start working on and build the habit of doing that stretch consistently.
Okay.
Yeah. So does that answer your question?
Yep.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in on this one?
Sure. By the way, that's Michelle, one of our other coaches at Mushin Movement. Hi, Michelle.
Hi. I guess for, in inverted commas, normal people, as you say, or people who don't exercise, I kind of like the idea of doing CARS. If you don't know what CARS is, controlled articular rotations, that is part of our kin stretch class. I would strongly recommend everyone to do it every day, the moment they wake up, or in the afternoon, or even midday at night, whenever. You can even do a loaded version if they're stronger, but it's really helpful. And if you want to know more, go for a kin stretch class, experience it, or maybe you have already done one, because that really helps with every single joint in your body, and it helps you to expand your range of motion over time, of course, but it just keeps all your joints healthy, and that is what I will recommend everyone to do, regardless of whether they have a regular exercise routine or not. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. And yes, kin stretch is awesome. Okay, so I think that's all the time we have for hot seats. We're doing pretty well, by the way. We are on schedule. So if you have any more questions that come up throughout the next section, or even as you think about what we just said, text us in the chat, send us a message in the chat, right? Or ask the question after you've heard about ZhiQian's 5 awesome tips to better mobility training. Okay, so without further ado, my man ZhiQian, you can take over now.
Hello. Okay. Wait. Okay, never mind. So just as an introduction and a disclaimer, what I'm about to say is, of course, based on my experience in working on mobility stuff, based on my body, based on how I've worked with other students and stuff. And it's also based on my experiences over time incorporating like different aspects from different disciplines, say from like a bit of bodybuilding, a bit of like calisthenics, a bit of like FRC, and like other nitty-gritty practices that I've gotten the chance to like dabble a bit into. All this have played a role in influencing my thoughts and approaches to mobility. So it may or may not be in line or similar to what some of you might believe or do. So I guess just take it with a grain of salt, or if you have stuff that you would like to ask more on, agree, disagree with, find out more, we can always discuss whether during call or outside of the call. So other than that, let's get into it. Before we get to the 5 steps, I do want to point out a few things. And that is that number 1, the nervous system plays a big part when it comes to mobility development. All right. So when you, let's say, move into the forward fold, you start feeling sensations around the back of the thigh, around the hip area, around the lower back area. That is simply just the stretch reflex kicking in. Yeah. So it kicks in just because the body perceives it to be a dangerous position or quote unquote danger. As long as you don't have good enough control over it, the body sends out signals through these stretch reflexes to just limit you from going anywhere deeper into the position. It is sort of tensing up at the end position to stop you from going deeper into it. All right, that's good to know, because I believe in strength training when it comes to approaching mobility work. Because when you develop strength, especially over end ranges, you develop that safety that the body needs. So once it no longer perceives that danger, it is safe, you can have access to more range. Yeah. So a teacher that I follow has summarized this very well. Strength means safety, and safety means range. Okay. So from there, I've just mentioned end range strength training. For the most part, I have revolved my practice around end range strength training. So that is just one of the main ways I would use to just try and work towards overcoming the stretch reflex actively, develop lasting control over your range of motion, and in turn that will expand your mobility. Yeah. So we will jump right into the first step out of the 5 on like how I would approach mobility. And so number 1, that is to determine your goal. Yeah. So you need to have a goal in the first place to know what you want to work towards and what you need to work towards. And whatever goal you've set, I would say it has to be realistic. I'm sure some of us started later, and the dream of like bending like a circus contortionist can probably just stay as a dream. It depends, of course, on how your body adapts to your training over time, how efficient you have been in order to get closer to that goal. But I would say you have to be realistic. Not to say that it's wrong to dream big, but you have to set clear, shorter term goals. Like if I can't touch my toes, then my initial goal is to touch my toes, for example. Yeah. So consider realistic goals based on your current physical capabilities. And so sometimes the goal you have set might be quite a bit of a stretch. In between touching your toes, there might be several different components that needs to be worked on. So it's good to consider small little milestones or objective in between leading up to the goal. Yeah. So maybe I'll take it one step further for myself. If I want to stretch in a forward fold to get my head to touch my toes, that's like several components required. I need to have a very good hip flexion. I need to have good ankle dorsiflexion, for example. So those are just two small objectives, small milestones that I've set for myself that I need to work on before I hit the big goal of touching head to toes in a forward fold. Right. Okay. So I think that is important as well, because sometimes when you set your goals too far off and you see that you're not making progress, you tend to feel quite frustrated and demoralized. But if you actually sit down and identify in between milestones and checkpoints, it helps you to manage your motivation leading up towards like achieving your goal, of course. And lastly, like timeline. I understand there are like programs like 30 days to your front splits, 60 days to your head to toe, you know. But with those programs drawn out, there is a certain level of time commitment and intensity that you have to put in. So using that as a baseline, not everyone can commit 2 hours into a mobility session. Realistically, we are all working adults. So some of you might have more limited time than others. You might only be able to spare 1 hour 3 times a week to stretch. Does that mean that if you can't commit that 2 hours, you're not going to get your head to toe, for example? I don't think so. It just simply means that you will take longer periods of time, and you have to realistically manage your expectation with that. Your time frame will differ from others based on how much time you can put in, how disciplined you are with your training, and you know, how well your body adapts to the stimulus. Okay, so that's point 1, determine your goal. Now, point 2 is to identify the joints involved for like what your goal is. So let's say, back to my head to toe example, there is spinal flexion, there is hip flexion, there is knee extension, there's ankle dorsiflexion. So identifying the joints will give you some good idea on like how you work towards your goals. So listing out all those, you wouldn't just go and work on shoulder mobility because that's way out of the context. So you identify the relevant joints needed to be worked on. And from there, you would then identify, based on that specific joint, one out of the many, what is the opening angle and what is the closing angle. Yeah. So let's say for hip flexion, the closing angle will be like the hip flexors, the quads, and the opening angle will be like the glutes, the hamstrings. Yeah. To be honest, you don't need to have like excellent understanding of anatomy. Knowing anatomy will be good to have. Knowing more will probably help you make better decisions. But for the most part, it's just identifying. Like, I'm not going to stand up, but it's just like roughly, okay, this is the closing angle stuff. This is the opening angle stuff, back end stuff, front end stuff. It's just identifying those so that when you start picking exercises, you will pick exercises more intelligently. Yeah. Of course, on a side note, I have known teachers that they don't quote their anatomy to like the best, but they are still great teachers in terms of like leading students up to like remarkable levels of flexibility. So again, I don't draw like a one-to-one relation in necessity of understanding anatomy, but good to have, helps you make decisions better. Okay. And so once you have identified the joints involved, generally you can just keep things simple by, okay, every day I'm just going to sit and bounce and try to pulse head to toe to try to achieve that. It may work, it may not. Sometimes there are weak links within the joints that you've identified that's holding you back from like achieving that goal. And so it is a good idea sometimes to break up the work and identify individual joints in isolation. Yeah. So consider this: when you're working towards the end goal, whatever advanced positions you are working towards are just an expression of the capacity of multiple joints. So if there's a weak link and it's holding you back, that position might not be the best to address that weak link. So it is a good idea to just break it up, work on that weak link specifically. Like if ankle was the weak link, I wouldn't just keep pulling my ankles, my toes towards my head. I might just isolate some specific ankle dorsiflexion mobility work just so that I can, you know, more efficiently and or effectively work towards that head to toe goal. Okay. Third one, we have come to exercise prescription. So understanding what joints are involved, what lengthens and what shortens, we will then choose the exercise that's going to help us work towards that goal. For my goal of like head to toe. So let's say lengthening, opening angle stuff will be like just a simple seated forward fold or standing forward fold, and I will choose to bounce. Just a general example. And for closing angle stuff, maybe I would choose like seated leg lift. So I sit down, hands position beside the knees or somewhere further in front, and I'm going to lift the legs up and down for repetitions. Yeah, or for hold times. I'll get to that in a short while. You would choose your exercise prescription accordingly, but I would recommend that you keep it simple. Based on what some of you have been pointing out to us that, oh, I have limited time. What do I need to do to get the most out of my time? That's where I will start reminding you to keep it simple. One exercise for the opening angle, one exercise for the closing angle. Spend more time and effort on those versus trying to come out with an exercise library of like several different exercises that work just on one component. And like that might not be the best way to approach it. Okay. So when you start deciding what exercise you want to pick, consider also like the perceived difficulty of the exercise. I think I briefly mentioned this in the earlier parts when I'm answering one of the questions, but lower perceived difficulty of exercise can probably allow you to do more because it is less taxing on the body, both mentally and like specifically mentally. It can be taxing physically if you just ramp up the volume, but to simply put it, if it's lower perceived difficulty, it's less taxing on the nervous system, you can choose to do more volume. If it's something that's of a higher perceived difficulty, you might probably expect it to tax your nervous system more, and your overall volume that you can handle is probably much lesser. So that's again good to consider. Sometimes you see this exercise on wherever you see on Instagram or online, or you got this exercise during class, and oh, I feel that, oh, this one very intense, 8 out of 10 difficulty, but it feels like it opens up my glutes quite effectively. And you tried to do that in class, we do like 2 sets of like maybe just 10 seconds hold. Then on your own, you suddenly ramp up to like 5 sets of 30 seconds hold. You better be ready to expect that it's just going to drain you out a lot, and it's going to affect the rest of your session and like how you recover in subsequent days. So it's sort of cost to reward ratio. How tough of an exercise you want to pick, and how you want to pace your training accordingly. Okay, so consider that. So from there, once you have picked your exercises, then it's just determining like all your sets and reps and hold times. That comes in, that's where your different modalities come in. You decide accordingly. I'm not going to touch too specifically on that, but know that different modalities will work on the opening and the closing angle respectively, and different modalities will also challenge on those muscle tissues quite differently, whether you decide to hold or whether you decide to do for repetition or whether you decide to bounce in the repetitions. Okay, so moving on. Number 4 will be to manage training frequency and manage recovery from training. I guess that ties in quite closely with number 3, because what exercises you pick for number 3 will determine how you manage this training frequency and recovery. Yeah. So I did briefly mention earlier on, but the intensity of the program will relate to your frequency. If you had a very hard session on Monday, all of your exercise that you have picked is a perceived difficulty of like 7, 8 out of 10. You will probably be fatigued and even sore for days. And you might expect yourself to have like affected decreased range of motion even if you decide to do the same program on Tuesday or on Wednesday, just because your body is sore. You need time for it to recover. You need time for it to like adapt so that you can do the exact same program again. But on the flip side, if you are just doing light passive stuff, perceived difficulty of like 2 or 3 out of 10, then yes, those are something that you might be able to afford to do every day. Okay, so I guess this will answer some of your questions about, oh, I only have time to train 3 times a week, what do I do? Or I only have time to train 10 minutes every day, what do I do? Consider all these ideas of like perceived difficulty, how much time you have, and how you would decide on your exercise prescription. Okay, so whatever you choose, your stimulus has to be enough. All right, there can be a point where it's too little, and there can be a point where it's too much. Too little will be like, oh, I want to get head to toe forward fold every day, just for like 1 minute a day. I'm just going to bounce 10 times and I feel quite stretched already, I'm done. But you clearly know that bouncing 10 times is just you limbering up your body and getting blood flowing into the joints. It's not even enough to get any actual work done. So that's just an extreme example, but know that not enough means inadequate stimulus for adaptation. On the other hand, there can be things that are too much. So you might want to try and, let's say, use deadlifts as a tool to try to improve on your forward fold, to work towards head to toe. You can't deadlift 100 kilo, but you are going to try to anyways because more is better. And you try to lift, you can't lift, it's very taxing anyways on the body, and you leave the session feeling like you are very drained out from trying to lift 100 kilo. There may be some degrees of progress, but effectively, like, there's not quite enough work being done. All the effort you have put in is just trying to lift something. It's not even to the realm of like overcoming isometric. It's just trying to. So that's another far-fetched example on the other spectrum of like choosing exercises that are either too little or too much. Okay, so whatever you choose, allow enough time for recovery as well. So to just close off this section, remember, higher intensity, you might want to consider or know that you might need more time to recover. Lower intensity, you might be able to afford to do more frequently over your weeks. Okay, so last one is, of course, to explore. Like for the points 1 to 4, for the most part, it's been more on a systematic way of approaching training. That's quite streamlined to me trying to work towards the goal of achieving head to toe. But I do find value in exploring with your practice sometimes. Like, just play around. Maybe there might be some disciplines that you always wanted to get into that whatever they have been doing within the discipline, or whatever you are going to do within that discipline, might require you to challenge your forward fold flexibility. Or let's say you saw some cool poses on Instagram that you want to try, or some Instagram challenges that you want to try, and okay, you decide to go and try. Like, it's just ways for you to discover, like, oh, what you can do, for example, like what your training has led up to you be able to do. That might be good as a form of like motivational booster, like, oh shit, like my training has done something for me. I remember trying this some time ago and I can't, and now I can. That's a way to measure your progress and just to test. Or maybe that's also a way to test on your weak links. Like your program, you might think have covered what exactly you need to do to achieve your goal. But maybe when you try to explore onto whatever things that you decide to play around and explore with, suddenly you feel some intense stretch at some areas that you have never felt before. Then, and it's relevant to the position that you're trying to work towards. Then you will start to consider like, oh, maybe I've never considered working it in this way because it's targeting new muscle groups, for example, or giving me new types of sensations. And then from there, you can like probably re-plan your program from there, not by a whole lot, but just give you a different perspective onto how you can readjust your program to more efficiently and effectively work towards your goals. So I do encourage play, but you would want to manage your ratio of play and exploration work to actual systematic training. This definitely will vary. I would be okay with having a ratio of like 80% systematic training and 20% like play work. Managing motivation with your training is a realistic component of practice that you need to consider over the long run. You can be training for 2 hours, nose deep into a program that gets you to your head to toe and even beyond, but there might be a point that you just cannot manage it or tolerate it anymore, and you get to a point of burnout. Like, we want to manage our practice in a healthy manner. So consider managing your motivation. I think that for the most part will determine how you manage your ratio of play to training. Consider the consistency. Let's talk about consistency first. Whatever you are doing, I think that at the end of the day needs to be some degree of consistency. And lastly, intensity. So I think it's worth noting that your play work might be something that's a perceived intensity of like higher than 5, and that might influence your actual program that you're going through at that period of time. So if I were to just close off this 5 steps by linking back to the earlier points, remember, higher perceived difficulty might mean that it's more taxing on the body. You need more time for recovery. You might be able to do lesser overall volume. On the flip side, lower volume, maybe you can do more in terms of volume. You can train more frequently, and yeah, that's less taxing on the body. So that's my 5 steps. Just to sum it up, I know Alvin has wrote it down, but I'll just sum it up anyways. Number 1 is to determine your goal. Number 2 is to identify the joints involved. Number 3, you will move on to exercise prescription after that. Number 4 is to manage your training frequency and recovery based on your exercise prescription. And then number 5, whatever you have done with 1 to 4, sometimes you can just loosen up a bit and just go and explore and play around. So yeah, that's my 5 steps. And yes, that's it.
Yeah, so don't worry if you haven't been taking notes, because we will send this out in the email. So you have not subscribed to this Mushin chat email, you can go on to our Instagram. There's a link there. We will be sending out a recording, a video of this recording as well. So you can always just look back and listen to what we say again, if one time isn't enough. Okay, we do have about 7 minutes left for any additional questions. So I see that awesome. Not that many people left this time. Most of them are still in the chat. So does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? It could be related to what we just talked about, or the theme today of how to be mobility trained, or it could be something specific to yourself, say related to handstands, back bend, head to toe. If you don't know what head to toe is, it's fine, right? Or something like anything at all that you just want to explore, like you would like us to explore. So Xian, do you have any questions on your end? No?
Hello. Can I ask a question?
So like we also have our other coaches in the chat group. Michelle is here. Raphael is here. If you do have a question you'd like them to answer, this would be a great time. Hi, Valerie, you have a question?
Oh, sorry, I unmuted
Oh,
accidentally.
no problem. Okay.
I think someone has a question. I hear someone in the background.
It's me, Christina. I don't know if anybody can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Christina, you
Okay.
need to be a bit louder.
Oh, okay. How is this better?
Yes.
Okay. I've sort of a question regarding like mainly injury. So how do you deal with like injuring yourself in a practice, and how much time do you sort of give yourself to recover? I mean, it really depends, right? It depends on the how intensely you injure yourself, and during that injury like recovery period, is there like, do you do anything to sort of help you expedite your recovery process? Yeah, so that's basically it. Maybe if you guys have like any personal experience to draw on, that would be quite helpful to help illustrate, I suppose.
Yeah. So I think if you want personal experience, we have lots of those. I believe that all the coaches here have gone through injury at some point of their training. So like for myself personally, like I have quite a bad left shoulder, and that has translated to wrist stuff for all my handstands. And in terms of like, you know, the long answer to all these questions, it's going to be, it depends, because everyone's different. And it's the same when it comes to injury. People recover at different rates. Injury recovery isn't linear. It doesn't just depend on how much time you lay off injury. The amount of stress you experience, the amount of sleep you have, even the quality of food you're eating, all this stuff leads towards your rate of recovery. So, but of course, and this is my personal opinion, if you just rest and you don't move, it's really hard to get any sort of feedback on how well you're doing, right? So I always encourage people to back off, but continue to move. Understand what hurts, what doesn't, and work within the pain-free limits. If you continue to do this over time, this creates a feedback loop for you to understand how well your recovery is going. If despite getting enough sleep, good food, right, less stress, and laying off, you're not recovering, something has to change. It could mean that maybe it's something that you can't recover on your own. Maybe it's something that requires manual intervention. Just a maybe. But if it's recovering, everything is going great, it also could be an issue of just needing enough time to recover. Right, so that's my take on it. ZhiQian, Raphael, Michelle, anything to add?
If they're not talking, I'll talk. Okay. I am actually dealing with wrist and elbow issue. So I think it'll be quite a good time to speak on that. It came up at the start of circuit breaker. And by this point in time, it's about, I would be confident to say at least 80% recovered. And so I would bring up these 3 points first for you to consider. You would manage your training volume, you will manage your training intensity, and you will manage your training frequency. Yeah. Of course, because you're injured, that definitely means that your ability to manage stuff, manage stress on that body part or joint in particular is affected. So long answer short, you have to tune all these 3 components down. Yeah. To what degree? Then that's where the general answer of it depends comes back up. Yeah. So I think I briefly spoken on it with the previous call, but sometimes injury happens as a result of you doing too much. So that's like too much frequency and too much volume. So that's more like I'm not sure if I'm using the right term, more of like a repetitive stress kind of thing. Whereas there might be types of injury that's just because your intensity of the exercise that you have chosen to do is a little too much. Like let's say I've been pushed into a stretch position, and that position and my stress tolerance for that position is way lower than what I was pushed into. That's where like the sudden injury occurs. So I'm just going to roughly categorize it within these two. So I'm just displaying these two out on the table so that it might help you make some degrees of like better decision on like how you should tune on the frequency, on the volume, on the intensity. Yeah. The last thing I will point out, of course, I'm certain most of our other coaches might be might probably play on the safe side of this when it comes to addressing pain. From my time in like reading up into basic pain science and understanding about pain and a little bit of the nervous system, I would say this: understand that pain is a signal produced by your body in response to how you are interacting with your environment, the type of movement or position you're getting into in relation to like your environment, like what sort of exercise you're doing, basically. Okay, so it does help you to some degree to make your decision as well with like your rehab stuff. I'm not saying that you should work through pain all the way, but just to very limited degrees, because sometimes your body might just be freaking out a little bit. And when I mean a little bit, I did mention on multiple occasions in classes and stuff that we just have a scale of like 1 to 10 when it comes to measuring our perception and sensation of pain. And I would say that 3 and below, kind of okay. 4, you start to think twice a little bit. Maybe you start treading along the 4 first, but it did get better over time. That's sort of okay. If it actually stays there or gets worse, then maybe you might need to back off. And with that, you should know that 5 and above means it's absolutely a no-go. And I'm speaking on that from my personal experience as well, in terms of like working with pain, but sparingly. I repeat, working with pain, but sparingly. Of course, it can be, I can get quite nervous on my end when it comes to giving this kind of advice, because most people have different pain tolerance. What is a 2 for me? And I tell you 2, but it's actually like a 5 for you. So I would say, I would close off with this: whatever rehab program that you are going to go through, a program would make sense if it brings you progress. A program wouldn't make sense if it brings you several levels back. So you have to be also quick to react. If it causes things to get worse, I need you to back off immediately. If it sort of gets better, then okay, maybe whatever you're doing is sort of okay. Yeah. So keep in mind those few things, and yeah, I hope that helped with having a better idea of stuff. Yep.
Is it okay, Christina? All right, cool. Okay, everyone. With that, I think we are just on the 1 hour mark. So I'm just gonna close off the session today. Recap ZhiQian's 5-step process to his mobility training that you can adapt as well. Like, first one, determine your goal. Second one, identify the joints involved. Third one, exercise selection. 4th point, managing training frequency and recovery. 5th point, just playing and exploring new movements and practices. So like I said, sign up for the email group. You will get a link to a recording. You can watch it again. Don't have to really take notes. And I just want to let everyone know that due to the phase 1 of the circuit breaker being indefinitely extended, Mushin Movement will be continuing with our virtual classes. There's an email sent out yesterday. It's going to come out on social media pretty soon. We do have a promotion for unlimited classes and recorded classes, which is a new thing for the whole month of June. It will be $220 for 4 weeks of access to both. So there's something that you're interested in, go to our website, click on the link, make their purchase, and you can start booking for classes for next week. So this promotion ends on the 31st of May, which is in 6 days. So yes. So you want to try out Kin Stretch? If you want to try out ZhiQian's back bend class, Michelle's spine class, Raphael's beginner handstand, progressive mobility lower limb, yeah, it's a great time too. Cool? Okay. So yeah, anything else from you, ZhiQian, Michelle, Raphael? No? Right, with that, thank you so much for joining us today. Right, applause for you if you're around. That has been a long 1 hour and 4 minutes. So we will definitely have another of these sessions. As usual, sign up for our email, Instagram, Facebook. We're super active on those platforms. And yeah, we will see you the next time around. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
See you. Thanks, Tonio. Emma, thanks. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy your public holiday.
What's up, fam?
Yeah. Sorry, Jessica. Jessica, sorry, I saw a chat. Did you send something in the chat?
Oh yeah, don't worry.
Oh.
Right, I'm just trying to find.
Yeah, I briefly saw you mention something about that. Like if you want to ask us more questions, you can always email us.
Great.
Or just on Facebook, Instagram, any platform is fine, whichever works best for you. Always happy to chat about stuff.
Thank you very much.
Hey, hope it's helpful.
Bye. Thank you. Yeah,
bye
it was.
bye.
Yeah, bye.
Okay, cool. See ya.
See ya.
Okay, only coaches left.